Hey guys, welcome back to the After Dark podcast. So today I'm going to be telling you about the Bear Brooks murder. Bear Brook Park was a mobile park situated in the middle of Brook Bear State Park. Everybody knew everybody. It was a safe and quiet place to live in, or so they thought. In 1985, 2 bodies were found inside a barrel, leaving residents scared and confused. Had they been living next to a murderer? On November 10th, 1985, a group of kids playing hide-and-seek stumbled upon a barrel. Curious kids went over to investigate. One of the boys tried to lift the top of the barrel, and when he did, they were hit with the putrid smell. One of the boys pushed the barrel over, and the boys quickly left the area. 4 months later, a call came in to the police station. A hunter found a barrel and noticed something sticking out of it, and as he approached it, he realized he was looking at human remains. When police arrived to investigate the barrel, they discovered it contained human remains. It was later determined to be the bodies of a woman between the ages of 20 and 30 and a young girl ages 8 to 10. Both were dismembered and the remains wrapped in plastic. The cause of death being blunt force trauma to the head. Police in the small town of Bear Brook were not equipped or knowledgeable to solve a crime such as this. This was their first homicide, and they knew they needed help. The officer called dispatch and asked them to call the state police and the district attorney. So police began investigating, asking neighbors if they had heard or seen anything suspicious, or if anybody had gone missing. And everybody said that they didn't notice anything, and they didn't notice anybody missing. Police started looking at a few suspects, starting with the owner of the land on which the barrel had been found, a man by the name Ed Gallagher. He denied having any knowledge of any barrels. They asked him if he had any visitors or if anyone had asked to dump anything on his property, because his property was like a dump site. But he said that he hadn't noticed anybody coming in and nobody had asked to dump anything. And he refused to name anybody because he said he wouldn't like it if people started pointing fingers at him. After speaking with and clearing many suspects, the police had no lead. The case caught the attention of internet sleuth Rhonda Randall and her brother. They were obsessed and determined to solve this case, bringing to police the names of many suspects that police eventually cleared, and the case eventually goes cold, leaving residents and police frustrated. 15 years later, Detective John Cody comes across a case and decides to solve it, or at least find out who the victims were. He decides to go to the woods where the bodies were found to kind of get a feel for the place. He wanted to see for himself what the killer saw in that area, or why he chose that area to dump the bodies, when he suddenly notices something sticking out of the ground, which at first looked to be like an odd-looking rock. Upon further inspection, he realized it was a barrel, a second barrel.
A second barrel?
On May 9th, 2000, the remains of 2 young girls were found near the first discovery site. Police believe all 4 murders happened at roughly the same time, despite investigators missing the second drum. The victims were 2 girls, one aged 2 years and the other 4 years approximately. The cause of death for these girls was also blunt force trauma, and they had been dismembered.
Oh my gosh.
Investigators wondered if all victims were related, perhaps a mother and her 3 children. In order to find out, police had to make the difficult decision of exhuming the body of the Jane Doe found 15 years before. DNA reveals the bodies are a mother, her baby girl, her older daughter, and an unrelated young girl. Police sent the skulls of the victims for facial reconstruction to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in hopes that someone could potentially recognize at least one of the victims. The pictures are shown across the U.S., but nobody comes forward to identify the victims. And once again, the case goes cold. But amateur investigator Rhonda Randall wasn't giving up hope. She was determined to find out who had committed these horrific crimes, and she refused to let the killer get away. But most importantly, she wanted the victims to be identified. Rhonda and her brother were convicted Ed Gallagher was involved somehow. He seemed to be the obvious suspect, since he owned the land where the first barrel was found. She gave the name to investigators and her reasons for him being a suspect, and at this point, police were desperate for any information on the case. They brought Ed in for questioning again, but promptly realized he was not their man. But Rhonda knew there was something there. She kept questioning Ed, and after 3 years of Rhonda's persistence, he finally got tired of her and said to her, "Look, lady, you are barking at the wrong tree. The man you should be looking at is Bob Evans." That name was new to police. He had never been on the radar. Police didn't even know who Bob Evans was. Ed told Rhonda that Bob was a little crazy and a weirdo. Ed and Bob met while working at a nearby mill. When Rhonda tried looking Bob up, she came up empty-handed. There was no records of him ever opening a bank account, no ID, no license, nothing. But there were people who remembered him. In 1981, Evans was living with a girl by the name of Denise Bowden. Their home was 20 miles from BROOK Park. Denise was pregnant at the time, but her family did not believe Evans was the father. The last time Denise's family had any contact with her was after Thanksgiving of that year. Denise and her 6-month-old baby Lisa left town with Evans, never to be seen again. In 1986, Detective Cliff Harris of San Bernardino, California, gets a call from dispatch about a little girl in Chino, California, who had been left with a family who had been looking after her. But after the father never came back for her, they decided to call police. The girl's father's name was Gordon Jensen, and the family told police that he had just vanished. So police took her into custody to try and figure out where her father was. Maybe he had been in a car accident, or maybe he had been arrested for something. Nothing seemed suspicious yet. But after talking with the 4-year-old, Officer Harris had a gut feeling that something wasn't right. Investigators discovered that little Lisa had been molested by her father. After the interview, police began looking for Gordon, looking him up, but weren't able to find any information on him, which led detectives to believe that it was an alias. Detective Harris was determined to find this Jensen guy, and upon questioning Jensen's neighbors, he discovered that he had lived in Santa Cruz before. So he went to Santa Cruz. There, he found that the community where he lived loved him because he would fix their electronics. They had a room where they all gathered to watch movies. So when their equipment broke, Gordon would fix it. Detective Harris noticed the VCR and wondered if maybe Gordon had left his fingerprints on it. So the detective took possession of the VCR, which he took apart, finding the fingerprints of 8 fingers. Police ran the prints and got a hit. A guy by the name Curtis Kimball. They knew that was their guy, but he had vanished. He was nowhere to be found. In 2002, in Contra Costa, California, Detective Roxanne Grunheid was investigating the disappearance of Unsoon June. Her disappearance was reported by a friend. Unsoon June, 45, was a chemist for a biotech company. In December of 1999, Unsoon introduced her family to her new boyfriend, Larry Vanner. Larry was a handyman. Her friends and family wondered what she could have seen in him. He was her total opposite. He was uneducated and unemployed, and soon grew tired of him and told a few of her friends she was planning on asking him to move out. Her friends and family say that this was the last they heard from her. It took them a little while to realize she had truly disappeared. When friends would ask Larry about Unsoon, he would always have different excuses and reasons for her to be gone. But finally, one of her friends got police to search the couple's home. In November of 2002, when police searched a crawl space under the house, they noticed an enormous pile of cat litter.
Oh my god.
Once officers took a closer look, they found a mummified foot, still wearing a flip-flop.
Oh my gosh. What the heck?
After digging more, they found other body parts. Eventually, police positively identified the body to be Unsoon.
Oh my gosh.
She had died by blunt force trauma to the head and then dismembered. Larry was the obvious suspect, but denied everything. Police were able to determine that a man matching Larry's description had bought 10 bags of cat litter at a nearby pet store around the time Unsoon disappeared. Larry was arrested, and upon running his fingerprints in the system, it was discovered that Larry was wanted for a parole violation under the name of Bob Evans.
No way.
He was also linked to a child abandonment case under the name of Gordon Jensen.
Oh my god.
Larry pleaded no contest to the charge of murder, but later entered a guilty plea. And Detective Roxanne believes he did it because he overheard her talking, saying that she wanted to do a paternity test on the guy to see if he was indeed Lisa's father. Mm-hmm. So he didn't want people meddling in that. He figured I'll just go down for Unsoon's murder and that's it.
Oh wow.
He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. He was sent to High Desert State Prison. where he died after serving only 7 years.
Oh, wow.
His death was a combination of lung cancer, chronic pulmonary disease, and pneumonia. San Bernardino detective Peter Headley got Lisa's case in 2013. Thanks to the advances in DNA, they were able to determine in 2015 that Denise Bodine was Lisa's mother and that the man she once thought was her father had indeed been her kidnapper. This information linked him to New Hampshire, placing him in the area around the time of the Bear Brooks murders when he was known as Bob Evans. DNA also confirmed the bodies found in the barrels were 24-year-old Marlise Honeychurch and her 2 daughters, 7-year-old Marie Vaughn and 2-year-old Sarah McWaters.
Oh, that's horrible.
Evans' daughter remains unidentified. The child's mother is suspected to be another one of his victims. He is also a suspect in many other crimes, but police haven't been able to prove any of them. When they find the bodies, they are so decomposed and it's hard for them to identify the bodies, so it's kind of hard to know where they're from and see if they have any link or any connection to this Evans guy. So police knew that Evans was probably also an alias, so they wanted to find out his true identity. In 2017, police released a video of an interview in the hopes of finding his true identity. 2 months later, DNA contributed by one of his children from his first marriage confirmed him to be Terry Petter Rasmussen. Due to the use of many aliases, he was dubbed the Chameleon Killer. Rasmussen was unlike any other serial killers due to the fact that he killed those closest to him, where most serial killers would never do that. They tend to focus on complete strangers. To this day, the identity of the middle child is still unknown.
Oh, that's sad. It makes sense that they dubbed him the Chameleon Killer because every time he committed his crimes, he was under a different alias and they couldn't catch him because of that, right?
Yes. 7-year-old little girl, Marie, her dad was actually looking for them because the dad had joined the Marines, I believe. And he said that every time he came back, they would be there. His wife and his daughter would be there. And then one day he came back and they were gone. So he really wasn't looking for them because he thought, well, maybe she just got tired of waiting for me and left. But he was actually trying to find his daughter because nobody knew what happened. They just knew that she left with this guy. And since he was so hard to track,
I know, that's crazy that it took so long for them to solve it, and that finally, due to the progression in DNA testing, that they finally caught him that way. Which, honestly, that is one of the main ways that they catch a lot of serial killers that committed their crimes a long time ago, like the Golden State Killer, for example.
In fact, yeah, they say that Lisa's case was actually the very first case that they solved through DNA, and that subsequently led them to try to find the Golden State Killer, and that's how they found him, actually.
Yeah,
but Lisa was the very first one that they tried that DNA.
Well, that's pretty cool that we now have a way to track these serial killers, and it's not as easy for them to get away with it, so...
Yeah, and it's sad that that little middle child, that's what they call it, the middle child, it's still unidentified. Nobody has claimed her. Nobody knows who her mother was. And they believe that, obviously, the Rasmussen, the Chameleon Killer, killed her mom and disposed of her somewhere because, remember, this was in New Hampshire and the bodies were found and he ended up being caught in California. So that's why they believe that there's so many other cases out there where he could have committed the crimes, but it's just really hard to prove. But it has the same MO.
Yeah.
He stuffs them in a refrigerator or he stuffs them in something, blunt force trauma, and dismemberment. So we'll never know.
I guess it'll always be a mystery, but we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow our social media. Tune in next week for the next episode because it's going to be a good one.